I won't be surprised if it goes anywhere between 200 and a million. It could even pop over a million for a little bit. But I think 475K for me is kind of the most likely target. I also have Q4 of 2025 as my target. It could extend beyond that based on what I'm seeing, but I'm kind of just sticking with these are the predictions I've made for the last 2 years, and I'm sticking with that 475K in Q4 of 2025. And then the other point, what I wanted to say is these people that are calling for we've already hit our peak and that we're going to roll over. There are a lot of people, and for whatever reason, they're Gen X economists and traders who, and I'm Gen X, so I can say this, I'm right in the middle of Gen X. They are freaking people out saying we are at this historical peak like 1929 or 1999. And we are at the cusp of a massive, massive recession, and we're going to have a deflationary bust, and stocks and Bitcoin are going to absolutely crash and get demolished, and so is oil. Like literally worse than 1929. There are multiple people talking about this. I think they're wrong. I look at their, I study macro. I run a macro hedge fund. It's a multi-strategy macro fund. I couldn't disagree more. We're all looking at the same data. I think that we are just at the early stages of a new economic cycle.
Dr. Ross, hello. How you been? I don't think you've been on the show for a couple of months now. A couple of months in Bitcoin terms is like years. So eternity. Welcome back. We were talking about this before we went on air. I do miss you on Twitter. I do. You had some amazing takes, and you've gone Nostr only these days.
You're kind, Nico. Thanks for having me on your show. I have missed you and your show, and I do miss you on Twitter. I'll just reiterate what we were talking about earlier is I nuked my Twitter account, I think in September, and it's been awesome in general. My stress level immediately went way down, but I do miss the interaction with my friends on Twitter. So that's been tough, and I was hoping there'd be more of a wave of people coming over to Nostr only. But it's been fun. It's been fun to watch it grow. I will say that the experience now on Nostr using different clients, I use Primal now, is way better than it was a year ago, and even way better than it was 6 months ago. So it's been great. But yes, I do miss you. Thanks for having me back on your show. I've been pretty reclusive, and that's been on purpose for the last probably 6 to 12 months or so. I don't get out much, and but I said if I come out of hiding, I'm going to come on your show because I really appreciate you and all the work you do for Bitcoin.
I appreciate it, Dr. Ross, and again, it's an honor to have you back. Now, one of the things that I did, because I do hang out on Nostr, especially since we went through kind of like a deplatforming scare, and that's really when it all snapped in my mind. I was like, okay, it's probably a good idea to, even if the volume isn't there, really help support this protocol, and I'm a huge fan of Primal. We actually had the CEO on today's show earlier on today, and we were talking about the 2.0 update, cool. Which I think is really, really cool. So anyways, I did see one of the posts that you posted, and I do want to talk about that because I think in Bitcoin terms, we all experienced, and you were around during this time, Dr. Ross, like the 2021 bull market. And I think a lot of people had the bull market didn't meet expectations. And when I'm seeing this bull market is people still have a lot of PTSD from that time, but I'm seeing the price at 106,000. And historically, the year after the halving is the year of the parabola. Less than 100%, we're at 200K. And it seems like you're one of the only people that is feeling as bullish as I am, because recently, I don't know where you said this, but I saw that you were talking about a $475,000 Bitcoin in 2025. So could you walk us through a little bit of your thought process on this?
Sure. So let me back up. I'll try to hit on the points you're talking about. So 2021, I still maintain was a fluke. I think it was an anomaly. I think that we were going to have a major exponential move higher, like it does, like Bitcoin traditionally has done. And then out of left field, a black swan event, China banned Bitcoin mining and said, you have to leave our country. And it was like legit. It wasn't like, oh, we're thinking about, banning it like we have in the past. And it was legit. And so 50% of the hash rate disappeared in about a month. And I know you were there and I was there, and it was crazy. And it literally just took all the air out of the room. It wiped it out. It was rough. On top of that, liquidity, which is another thing I follow, the liquidity cycle was already starting to peak at that time. So those two things happened. As we remember, Bitcoin went way down in the summer of 2021, and then it tried to make this, really, admirable comeback again, and it did get back up to new highs, whatever, 69K, somewhere around there. But I maintain that that was an anomaly. I maintain that if that wouldn't have happened, if China wouldn't have done what it did, probably also if SBF and all those frauds wouldn't have happened as well, that were fooling people into thinking they were actually buying Bitcoin, but they got smoked and they were not. If that hadn't happened, I think the price of Bitcoin would have been about 125K back in 2021. So then we went through that bear market. The bear market was exceedingly painful, and it was just horrible at the end, right? When all those centralized exchanges went bust and all the Bitcoin just went onto the market, smashed the prices, everything went down. So that was tough. That was all, I think, a very unusual couple of years for Bitcoin. I think now we're back on a more normal schedule. I think that Bitcoin is going to surprise many people this time around. I hear, first of all, there's this, the power laws floating around there. I'm actually a fan in general of the power law, but the dude who prescribes it and talks about it all the time, Giovanni, who I think is great. We have personality differences, but I think he's a nice guy and it's fine. He really is pushing the theory that we have diminishing peaks going forward. And there are other people that talk about that as well. And I think a lot of people are getting fooled by that. I see people on Twitter, even over on Nostr, we get little Twitter screenshots of people talking about how the peak is already in. Don't buy it at 100K. That's it. We're done with this cycle. I could not disagree more. I think those people are crazy. I think they don't know what they're talking about. By the way, not Giovanni. I'm saying the people who are calling for this 100K peak right about now and that we're heading into a recession. So there's a couple different schools of thoughts. We'll talk about both of them. I'll talk about the recession second. So first, do we have diminishing peaks? It was a diminishing peak in 2021, but I maintain that that was a fluke. So I think that people who think that we're going to have this lower peak of, I think they're saying kind of 200K, maybe 150 to 250K, somewhere in there. My guess is they're going to sell at 200 to 250K, and they're going to think they're right for maybe a month, and then it's going to just take off again and go higher. So I'm saying it could be 475. Look, I don't know, right? I have no insight into what it's going to be. I just think that that's kind of about where it would be if 2021 had been in a kind of a straight line for its peak compared to 2017 and compared to 2013. My range is actually very similar to Jack Mahler's. I heard him talking the other day. He has exactly the same range as I do, which is 200,000 to $1 million. People think you can't have these kind of ranges, but I'm like, this is Bitcoin, right? Bitcoin is crazy. It's super volatile. I won't be surprised if it goes anywhere between 200 and $1 million. It could even pop over $1 million for a little bit. But I think 475K for me is kind of the most likely target. I also have Q4 of 2025 as my target. It could extend beyond that based on what I'm seeing, but I'm kind of just sticking with these are the predictions I've made for the last 2 years, and I'm sticking with that 475K in Q4 of 2025. And then the other point, what I wanted to say is these people that are calling for we've already hit our peak and that we're going to roll over. There are a lot of people, and for whatever reason, they're Gen X economists and traders who, and I'm Gen X, so I can say this, I'm right in the middle of Gen X. They are freaking people out saying we are at this historical peak like 1929 or 1999. And we are at the cusp of a massive, massive recession, and we're going to have a deflationary bust, and stocks and Bitcoin are going to absolutely crash and get demolished, and so is oil. Like literally worse than 1929. There are multiple people talking about this. I think they're wrong. I look at I study macro. I run a macro hedge fund. It's a multi-strategy macro fund. I couldn't disagree more. We're all looking at the same data. I think that we are just at the early stages of a new economic cycle. It's actually grinding, and we can get into all this if we want to, or we don't have to talk about any of this. But I think we're early stages, and that the economy is going to be actually quite good throughout 2025. It's leaving me very optimistic. So coming full circle to what you're talking about, I am optimistic like you are. I think that 2025 is going to be a good year. As far as the price is concerned, I just like to remind people, even when we're in a bull market, and I officially declared that I switched from bull crab to full bull. I said around Michael Jackson's birthday, so the end of August of 2024. That's when I switched over, and I haven't looked back since then. I think the price was like 53,000 or something back at the time. During bull markets, it's super normal to have 20 to 30% pullbacks. That's just part of the game. So if we do have these big run ups, what I like to tell people is just imagine if the price was 30% lower a week from today, how would you feel? So keep those kind of things in mind. If we go up to, say, whatever, 120,000 here in the next couple of weeks, which is kind of my short-term target for the end of December, I wouldn't be surprised if we drop down to like maybe 85 or 80,000 or even 75,000 or so. And then we kind of start taking off again. So just kind of prepare yourself mentally for those pullbacks. It doesn't mean it's over. It doesn't mean the naysayers are right. The recessionistas weren't correct. It's just a normal, typical bull market pullback.
Absolutely. And as long as you've been in Bitcoin, there's something about the human brain and human nature that's like, it's very difficult. It's like when number goes up, you want a FOMO. When number goes down, you're like, oh my God, and then eventually kind of reaches that capitulation phase. Now, what's really interesting to me, Dr. Ross, is what you were just talking about. You're the only person that agrees with the China mining ban, because I've been saying that for like a couple of years. And I've been getting but like you see the hash rate and the price, and it's a direct correlation. Like you see the hash rate dropping, the price follows 50%. Those miners had to sell. Then the miners have a lot of the Bitcoin. They had to sell to relocate to a more favorable jurisdiction. You see the hash rate recover, price recovers with it, right? And then they had that like the glorious, like trying to make it up. But it seems like it was almost on purpose to take the steam out of it. And in regard to the next cycle, why I believe you're right, and I agree with you, is that Bitcoin tends to do the exact opposite of what everyone expects. And the general consensus this cycle is 150K, 200K. That is what I'm seeing everywhere. The power law. And again, Giovanni's a great guy. Fred Krueger, great. I love their work, right? But that is the general consensus on Bitcoin Twitter right now. And as you said, Bitcoin does the exact opposite of what everyone expects, right? So yes, I would be extremely surprised if we only did 100%, because 100% takes us at 200K next year. Mm-hmm. So I'd be extremely surprised. And if you're right about the 120 by the end of the year, and I'm feeling that way as well, it's less than 100% just to get to 200K. So. Right. And if you look at Bitcoin's historical patterns, it's never broken this, but for some reason people always think it sometime is different, which is the year after the halving year is the parabola year. And this time it's like, no, that can't happen. And the reason that I think that is because of everyone has PTSD from 2021. And if people forgot what a real party was in 2017. It's been 7 years, almost 8 years since we've had that level of excitement, that level of euphoria. So yeah, I completely agree with you. And it's interesting because that's not the general consensus. A lot of people are saying that's the opposite. Now, you said something there was really interesting, and I want to dive deep into that, which is the general kind of macro trends that you're seeing. And you're seeing that they're very favorable heading into 2025. That's something else. This is the first time I'm hearing that type of stuff. So what are you seeing that everyone else isn't seeing? What are you seeing that interests you?
Man, I just look at so much data, and all of the data I look at is great. So first of all, one thing is not good. U.S. manufacturing has been in the dumps. It's been in contraction or recession mode, meaning a level below 50 on the ISM. It's these scales that we use. If it's above 50, it's considered it's increasing, it's advancing. If it's below 50, it's in a contraction or it's in a recession. So U.S. manufacturing has been stuck in this weak sauce zone for about 2 to 2.5 years, and it's rough. So if you're in the manufacturing industry in America, things have been tough. I grant that to everybody. So, but why does it not matter that much? Because the services sector is such a huge part of the American GDP. So the economy in America is run on the services sector, not manufacturing. It's like a 2-to-1 ratio, even a little bit more than a 2-to-1 ratio. So, not that I feel bad for people who are in these sectors, but it doesn't drive the economy. What drives the economy is services. Services is killing it. With the numbers just came out again this morning, and I don't have them on me, but I think it was 58 or 59 or so. So expansion, they're just expanding like crazy, doing very well. And overall, the composite index is getting pulled up very solidly because of services. So manufacturing is weak, but it's only manufacturing. Housing, which everybody talks about, that and I was one of them in 2022. I thought the housing market was going to collapse because of what was happening with rates and the economy slowing down and all this kind of stuff. I thought in 2022 that we were headed into a recession, and I do believe that it's fiscal spending that saved us from going into a major recession at the time. Housing, people continue to say looks ugly. It is weak, but it's starting to improve. Okay, so that's a major driver of the economy. You can look at new orders, which are forward-looking indicators. So if you talk to people who own businesses, are orders in the future for the coming 3 to 6 months, are they looking up or are they down or are they about flat? Almost all of those indices are kind of off the charts going up. So what does that mean? That means that looking into the future, forward indicators, businesses should start to improve. I think we'll see manufacturing, especially with the new Trump administration coming in, who's very pro-manufacturing, very pro-bring it back to the United States, which I think is awesome. I think 3 to 6 months from now, U.S. manufacturing will be doing extremely well, and we'll be looking back at like, oh, what a relief! Can you believe we thought we were going into recession? Now look at how strong the economy looks today. Profits, people are talking about. So I follow a lot of value investors. I used to kind of live in the value investing community. They're talking about these very stretched multiples. So the price to earnings ratios, price to sales ratios are kind of getting very high, and they'll show charts about how it looks like 1929, looks like 1999, those kind of things. They're right. But what they're missing once again is that if you have a growing economy, what happens is then those earnings start to increase, the denominator starts to increase, and it shrinks those values. So the companies grow into those expanded valuations. So when I look at all of those things and then multiple other factors, all I see is we have liquidity that's starting to increase again. Global M2, which had been on the decline throughout all of 2022, basically bottomed in Q4 of 2022. It's been going higher. A lot of people come back at me and say, but in the last couple of months, it's been going down. What's happening? Is it over? Have we peaked? It's only because the dollar has been so strong. So we've had a huge burst higher in the dollar basically since I think the end of October or so until now, maybe even the beginning of October, somewhere in that time frame. This exact same thing happened the last time Trump was elected. It creates this strength and this optimism, and the dollar ripped higher to the end of December, early January, peaked, and then rolled over and basically fell all throughout 2017. I expect pretty much the exact same thing to happen, where the dollar quits being the dollar wrecking ball. It rolls over. It kind of decreases throughout the rest of 2017. Why is that important? Because the dollar really affects all other countries. So all other countries who have priced their debt or their goods and services in dollar terms, it hurts them when the dollar is strong. When the dollar weakens, their own currency strengthens. It makes it easier for them to pay back debt. It makes it easier on their economy. They can sell more goods. It's easier for them to run their economies. And it's basically just net good for the world when the dollar is weakening. When economies are doing well, banks start lending. When they lend, they're creating new monetary supply. That increases global M2, and that as the global M2 starts to increase, it finds its way into more further out on the risk curve into stocks, and especially into Bitcoin, which is the great absorber of liquidity. So lots of reasons there, but everything I look at, and I'm not even trying to be snarky about this. I see people talking about, I can't believe we're looking at the same data and you have a negative picture with what's going on. Most of them are valuations based or technicals based, or they're more focused on what's happening outside of the US, because it's true. The EU looks really rough right now. It's very stagflationary. And China looks very stagflationary right now, meaning a stagnant economy but higher inflation. The US, however, is not in that picture. And as the global growth engine, which the United States is, and I expect it to be even more powerfully with this next administration, we are going to lead the world out of this stagflationary condition and into growth again. And that's very bullish for risk assets and especially for Bitcoin.
And that is extremely exciting, Dr. Ross. And what I'll say about that is, I might not be able to describe it the way that you're seeing it, because you have this experience with your background and you're seeing all this data points, but I see the vibes. I feel the vibes. I see the hope in people. I want to tell you about the best place to build your automatic self-custody Bitcoin stack. I'm talking about bitcoinwell.com. What makes bitcoinwell.com different is that it's a completely non-custodial platform, meaning as soon as you buy Bitcoin and the funds clear, it goes straight to your self-custody Bitcoin wallet address. And that perfectly aligns with the Simply Bitcoin ethos of the separation of money and state. Support Bitcoin on-ramps that are self-custody by default. To get started, go to bitcoinwell.com today. It takes 2 to 5 minutes to sign up, and bada bing, bada boom, you're ready to buy Bitcoin. And it's extremely exciting, and especially because of this change in tune. And Dr. Ross, I don't think we've spoken since this has happened, but the tremendous amount of not only institutional adoption, but institutional acceptance of Bitcoin. And you're hearing left and right of traditionally very conservative companies that perhaps they don't have exposure to direct spot Bitcoin, but you hear that they have exposure to Bitcoin via the ETFs or via MicroStrategy, which is essentially like a Bitcoin fund at this point, the way that the stock is behaving. So, would it be safe to say that this is a new chapter in Bitcoin's history? And what's really exciting too is all of this is happening and we're heading into 2025, where you're making the case that the macro environment looks very positive. The regulatory environment specifically for Bitcoin looks very positive. And then again, this is a change. This is a change. Not only institutional adoption, but the nation state adoption as well. And what I've noticed, the last 3 or 4 months, it's absolutely hilarious. You have, the president of Russia, Putin, basically saying, we can't ban it. Then a day later, news comes out that the Duma, which is the equivalent of the House of Representatives here in the United States, they're introducing a bill to make a Bitcoin strategic reserve. Brazil, a politician is introducing a bill to make Bitcoin strategic reserve. There's this video going viral about this French politician making this speech at the European Parliament, basically saying like, look, we have to take a look at this Bitcoin thing. We made fun of El Salvador. The IMF made fun of El Salvador, but this guy's like showing off on Twitter and he made hundreds of millions of dollars off this trade. Like what's going on here? So it's a vibe shift. The macro situation is amazing, but I want to get your take on and this is up your alley, Dr. Ross, right? Could you ever have imagined back in 2017 the change in tune from the legacy financial institutions?
I hate to be this guy, but yes. We've been talking because we've been talking about this. This is inevitable. Like, right? We knew this was going to happen. What I will say is surprising is how quickly it's happened, and how quickly, to your point, all of these things have suddenly shifted. And it seems like suddenly, like it went from super dark and negative, and like Elizabeth Warren is treating us all like we're criminals, and we're all getting shadow banked and shadow banned. Operation Choke Point 2.0, that kind of stuff. And then suddenly, like it's just gone, and like. To your point, there's all these favorable conditions now for the first time. So it's always been inevitable, right? I used to go on Cafe Bitcoin and all these things all the time and talk about how Wall Street is coming. Like that's just a natural progression of Bitcoin. And what we need to do as Bitcoiners is protect the soul of Bitcoin. We need to make sure it doesn't get consumed by Wall Street and taken over by Wall Street. And Wall Street will try. And people are fighting against it, right? And we got to make sure that we don't get so enamored with number go up that we lose what's important with Bitcoin. We got to still keep the soul. We got to remember that this is actually an alternative to the U.S. dollar and the fiat government, fiat currency system, right? And so keep building out these other things, keep building out layer 2 and layer 3 so we can use it as a totally alternative financial system and actually get away. I'm of the theory, and this is another quote that people think I'm crazy when I say this, Bitcoin is too powerful for Wall Street, and I actually believe that it will consume Wall Street from the inside out. And people think that's crazy. I'm saying within 10 to 20 years, it's going to outgrow Wall Street and basically bust out of Wall Street. And Wall Street will eventually bend the knee to Bitcoin. And it's almost hard to believe right now. It's kind of like I said 2 or 3 years ago that I think MicroStrategy is going to be the largest company by market cap by the year 2033 or 2034. I still think that's very possible. And people just laughed at me and mocked. I'm like, just wait. Like, you don't understand like how crazy this is. And if you can do speculative arbitrage by borrowing dollars and buying Bitcoin with that and just growing and growing and growing, and then plus being riding the tails of the exponential growth of the Bitcoin monetary network, the upside is almost limitless, especially when you compare it to limitless fiat currency creation. So I think it's all inevitable. I think it's coming. I think that every company that doesn't have Bitcoin on its balance sheet or a Bitcoin reserve strategy will go to zero over time relative to Bitcoin. So it's like, if you want to survive in the next 10 to 20 years, you have to switch over. To me, it's very basic. And again, nobody understands this. So many people in old Wall Street, they think of Bitcoin as a technology stock instead of what it really is, which is just better money. Excuse me. So why is that important? It's because if you don't get onto this system, the rest of your business trends to zero over time against Bitcoin. Businesses cannot keep up with the annualized rate of return of Bitcoin. They can't exist on this fiat system that's collapsing all around us. They have to get on board. And so the longer they delay that situation, and whether you're an individual or a family or a pension or an endowment or a church or a small business or a large business or a nation state, it's the same for everyone. And the sooner, and I know you talk about this all the time on your show, but it's the game theory at play. The longer it takes you to get on board, the further behind you're going to be in this new world. And why is this? Like, why is that? It's because Bitcoin isn't just this like cool little thing, like this neat little tech stock. It's literally a new monetary technology that's a change the world technology on par with, we've talked about this, the wheel, fire, electricity, indoor plumbing, railroads, the automobile, airplanes, personal computers, the internet, right? This is the internet of value. And so it's not like it's this cool little side asset. It's literally this new invention. It's kind of like if it was the year 1950 and you were a business and you were still trying to run your business without electricity. Like you have to comply to the way the world is shifting and changing. Or if you're in the year 2024 and you don't have an internet strategy for your business, it's just ludicrous to think about. But I'm old enough to remember there were businesses that were actively fighting and mocking the internet back in the 90s and the early 2000s. Again, as a value investor, people used to just literally mock Netflix. They would and talk about how awesome Blockbuster is. They would literally mock Amazon and talk about how awesome Walmart is and how Amazon will never even come close to being the same size as Walmart. And now look at, Amazon is multiples larger than Walmart. So just like you had to get that sort of internet strategy, you now have to have a Bitcoin strategy, a new monetary technology strategy, or you will become obsolete. It's just what it is. And I think that's inevitable. And so even though people think I'm crazy, 5-10 years from now, we'll be talking about that. And they'll ask me, well, did you ever see it coming? I'm like, yes, it's going to come. It has to come because it's clearly better money. It's a better monetary network for the world. And if you're not on board with it, you're going to become obsolete.
100%. And I mean, what's fascinating to me about this year is how Saylor is proving that on Wall Street, best performing stock of the year, up, I think, almost 500% or a little bit shy of that. And Nayib Bukele is proving that on the nation state level. Now, Dr. Ross, what I want to ask you about, which is the Saylor strategy, is fascinating. Like, how is he able to do this? I have the conceptual understanding of like the mechanisms behind it, but, it's almost as if he's using the prior system, He's taking advantage of the prior system, which I don't think was prepared for something like Bitcoin, to buy more Bitcoin. It's, and people call it a speculative attack on the dollar. Could you describe what the mechanisms is behind it? And is he putting MicroStrategy at risk by doing this?
So the only people who think he's putting it at risk are people who I think don't understand what Bitcoin is. They think there's a chance that Bitcoin could go to zero or fail. And I used to think that back in like 2016 and maybe 2017 and 18. And then after thinking about it and studying it for years and years and years and years, I realized like that's just silly. It's like saying electricity is going to fail or indoor plumbing is going to fail. Just because it's a monetary technology doesn't mean it's not a technology that's improving humanity. So that's premise number one. Is Bitcoin going to fail? Absolutely not. Like 0% chance, unless, again, and he gets asked these questions all the time, and I think they're so funny. Like, whoa, and he's like, well, I suppose if like a meteor struck the Earth and we exploded, or that we collided with the sun, yeah, then Bitcoin would probably fail. But we'd probably have bigger problems on our plate if that happened. So Bitcoin's not going to fail. So that's the one thing. It was brilliant what he did, and I avoid the term speculative attack, even though that was popularized. I think it was Pierre Rochard maybe that coined that term, or Bitstein or somebody, way back in the day, way before my time. Brilliant thought process. I call it a speculative arbitrage or just a carry trade. So like a Bitcoin carry trade. What you do is you borrow depreciating currency, which is any fiat currency, but you can use the dollar. That's great. He could do this with anything. He doesn't have to do it in dollars. It wouldn't have to be the U.S. stock system. It could be like MetaPlanet, and they're using assets in Japan to do the exact same thing. Excuse me. What he's doing is he's filling a need. So there was this huge need in Wall Street for people who wanted access to Bitcoin but couldn't have it. There's all these rules, right? It's so stupid. It's all these communities of people who decided like, here's exactly what you can do and here's what you can't do. And one of the things you can't do is you can't buy Bitcoin. It's like, okay, well, people don't want to miss out on this, on these gains, obviously. So one easy thing to do is you can, if you have a brokerage account and if you're a business, you can just buy MicroStrategy, the equity. Okay, that's one thing you can do. A second thing is that traders love volatility, right? So they love Bitcoin, but maybe they don't have cryptocurrency exchanges and access to trading there. They want to trade in the old system, the old Wall Street system. So what it does is now you can create option strategies. You can do trading, and because of its massive volatility, you can do all these kind of trading strategies. So traders love that extreme volatility. They've also created these double long and triple long products, things like that, which I think are crazy, by the way, and don't recommend them at all. Like, never use leverage with Bitcoin. Don't use leverage with MicroStrategy. Those kind of people. The huger, the more important product that they've created, because they have this Bitcoin core, this treasury of Bitcoin assets, they can spin off things like convertible debt and other forms of debt. And so now the debt markets can get into Bitcoin for the first time. And I know you probably know this too, but the Bitcoin convertible debt and these bonds, they've massively outperformed regular bonds. So anybody who, sorry.
No, I mean, I'm just getting excited.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So imagine, right? You're some kid working for some stodgy old bond company, then you can only invest in bonds, and you're like, awesome, we're going to make 4% this year, super low volatility, because you got to have low volatility. It's all people talk about. Like, awesome. But they get Bitcoin, right? And so they go talk to their 70-year-old boss, like, hey, I think we should get Bitcoin because our results suck and we're actually losing purchasing power to inflation every year. And they're like, well, we can't do that. And so what did Saylor do? He's like, hey, I got a deal for you. I will give you access to Bitcoin. I'll give you exposure to Bitcoin, but with a much lower volatility. So if Bitcoin has like a 60 vol, we're going to take the vol down for you, to say 10% or 15% or somewhere in that range. And we're going to limit all your downside. So what Saylor is basically saying is, I'll absorb all of the volatility or almost all of the volatility on your behalf and give you this much of the upside gain, even though the stock is probably going to go up to here. You'll go here, but with no downside risk. And to a bondholder, that's like a miracle. That's like the greatest product that you can imagine, because are you kidding me? I could get like a 60% return over a year or two. with no downside risk, yes, I'll take that all day. And so that's why when Saylor, he puts these products out, they're not only subscribed instantly, they're oversubscribed by multitudes and multitudes. So he might put out like, I'm going to offer 800 million, and like literally like that, he gets offers for like 1.2 billion. And they get oversubscribed. And I just literally think he's going to be doing this over and over and over and over and over again, because the desire in the bond market and on Wall Street to have these types of products where you can kind of dial up or dial down your volatility on the back of Bitcoin is insatiable. And I think that that's what makes MicroStrategy such an amazing product. And I get it, right? It's a centralized honeypot. There are downsides. There are huge risks to it. I still tell everybody the best thing to do is just own Bitcoin in cold storage, get it off exchanges, get it out of the traditional financial system. But people should be cheering him on at the same time. I think every single CEO, founder, CFO of any public company should be doing exactly what he's doing. I truly do. And I think if you don't do that, you're going to get left behind again. If you don't have a Bitcoin strategy, even if it's just as simple as you buy a little bit, you DCA into Bitcoin with some of your extra cash, if you're not doing that, you're going to get left behind and you're going to be obsolete within 10 to 20 years.
Yeah, I completely agree, and you just blew my mind. That was fascinating. Just going down the bond stuff. Now, look, Dr. Ross, I have a question for you, right? And this is something that, looking back, because I started my career has been Bitcoin, right? And I've been more media focused, but I understand. And I've explained this to you many times, right? Like I learned Bitcoin first, and then I've had to backtread to like try to understand the traditional financial system after. Yeah. And, one of the things that I noticed this year was for the first time, and I've held Bitcoin, it's 8 years now, holy cow. But, for the first time I was looking at it, I was like, should I have bought in MicroStrategy instead of Bitcoin? So that's my question to you, is if, you get a question from a client, or you get a question, and again, this is not financial advice, just asterisk, right? But if you get a question from a client or like a higher net worth individual, and they say, Dr. Ross, like, what should I do? Should I buy MicroStrategy? Should I buy spot Bitcoin? And then also, as a Bitcoiner, it kind of puts you in this conundrum, because you're just like, I want to take self-custody of my Bitcoin, but at the same time, you're looking at MicroStrategy and you said, theoretically, I could have multiplied the amount of Bitcoin I had. Like, let's say I would have put the equivalent of 1 Bitcoin into MicroStrategy in the beginning of the year. Maybe I could have gotten 4 or 5 out of that, So that's not something that's very popular within the Bitcoin community, but it is a very important question, because, you're pitching spot Bitcoin to, traditional investors or whatever. And they're looking at this like, why should I do that if I can just buy MicroStrategy? I'm comfortable within my Charles Schwab account. I don't have to learn, all this technical stuff and all that stuff that we all advocate for. What would be your advice towards that person? Again, not this is theoretical financial advice.
So a couple of thoughts. So let me say first that about 2 years ago, or 2 to 3 somewhere, really studied his strategy, what he's doing at MicroStrategy. And I thought, this is the only equity that I see that will outperform Bitcoin over the long run. I don't think anything else will. I don't think Bitcoin miners will. Everybody was all into Bitcoin miners the last cycle. They're not so much this cycle, but they're still doing pretty well. All other businesses, even if you, whether you're a tech company, whatever kind of company you are, you just can't outperform Bitcoin unless, how could you do that? Through intelligent leverage. So I actually think I'm the one who coined that term, and I think Michael Saylor took it from me, because now he talks about the intelligent leverage strategy of micro, and that's great. It's an open source, community, and maybe I didn't, maybe he came up with it, but that I just looked ahead and thought, this is the only thing because of this leverage, and if you shrewdly apply leverage, that's what a lot of hedge funds do too. That's how they can outperform the market if you shrewdly apply leverage and you have access to cheap leverage at the right times. Okay. So that's number one. Number two, everyone should own Bitcoin and have it in cold storage. Why? Because Bitcoin is an alternative to the collapsing fiat system. So as much as I like MicroStrategy, and I think it can actually even outperform Bitcoin, you don't know what's going to happen, right? And I hope he lives forever, but Saylor could die in a plane crash today. he could turn out he's Dr. Evil, and he could be like, ha ha ha, I'm stealing all of this, and we've duped you all, right? He stores this at different places. I think Coinbase custody is one of them. There's other places. These are honeypots. It's possible somebody could get access to this. You could have a bad player who could have a dude on his C-suite, in a C-suite, who colludes with some other dudes in a C-suite and be like, we're going to get the keys and we're going to take all this Bitcoin and move it to Tahiti, and there's all of these different risks that you take on when you own MicroStrategy and other assets. So those things are real, right? And nobody believes them, and especially in a bull market, especially if you're outperforming, nobody cares. They'll buy it at any price. They also don't care that you're buying it used to be on par to the NAV of the Bitcoin that it held on its balance sheet. And then it's gone up by multiples, 3x, 4x, 5x to the amount of Bitcoin it owns. It has owned, and that's kind of a market issue. And what happens is during bull markets is the further the bull market goes on, usually the greater that spread becomes. At some point, that spread closes again, right? People who own this is a different technical issue, but people who own GBTC back in the last cycle learned that the hard way. I actually learned that the hard way because in our hedge fund, that was about the only Bitcoin proxy I could find for my clients. 2021 was a really good year for Bitcoin, even though it was subdued like we talked about earlier. But GBTC went from a premium to a discount to NAV, to the net asset value. So GBTC, if I remember it, I think it returned 0% or right around, it was flat in 2021. That was very painful. So those kind of things can happen to MicroStrategy. And that's another thing that I think about is when it's the flavor of the cycle. So when it's the darling of the cycle, the last cycle, the darling started GBTC, and then that deflated. And then it was the Bitcoin miners. They were the darling of the 2021 cycle. Now it's MicroStrategy. What usually happens is everybody wants the darling right away. So that tends to peak earlier. So what I think is going to happen, and we've already seen that, right? That the MicroStrategy has crushed Bitcoin returns. I think it's up, to your point, 400 to 500% so far this year. I think if I had to guess, it's going to peak early, and then it's going to kind of fizzle while Bitcoin still kind of finishes its cycle a little bit later. So just a guess. I have no insight to that other than that's usually what happens for the darlings of the cycle, because everybody wants that. And then there's no more buyers left at some point. So that's a really long-winded answer to say, if you have no other alternative, go ahead and buy some MicroStrategy. Go ahead and buy the ETF if you want. But super critical that you first need to establish real Bitcoin in cold storage outside of the system, because if things hit the fan, or if the government says, hey, we're going to seize this or whatever, or something bad happens, if you have a Bitcoin proxy, if you have a Bitcoin IOU, you don't have real Bitcoin. I know you know that, and I know you tell your listeners that all the time, but you might be able to outperform for a while. It's the same with nonsense proof of stake crypto, right? A lot of people get attracted by that kind of stuff. You may outperform Bitcoin, but you're just playing with fire when you do that kind of stuff. And I think that's a whole different subject, but you're just buying nonsense at that point. And you really run the risk of just losing it all and getting rug pulled. And so just be smart.
Absolutely. And that was an incredible answer. So it was like, it's a leverage play, but it's not replacing real Bitcoin. All right. So if you're, because there's some regulations, I believe, like if you have like an IRA or something, like you can't actually, like you can't have self-custody Bitcoin. And it's what you said, MicroStrategy has fulfilled this need, right? People want exposure to Bitcoin, but because of the regulations, because of the laws, they can't do it.
Can I give you a quick
Sure.
Case in point? I run a hedge fund, right? So my platform is Interactive Brokers. I can buy Bitcoin through Interactive Brokers on my hedge fund, but I can only buy up to $1 million worth of Bitcoin they have a relationship with Paxos, this other exchange. I can't put it into cold storage. I can only own it there. And it's only up to $1 million. Right. And so that's fine if you're a smaller investor. But when I'm running a larger fund, that's just a small portion of my fund. Mm-hmm. So I have to find proxies to invest in Bitcoin. So I have to use MicroStrategy and have to use ETFs if I want to have more Bitcoin exposure. Very frustrating. Now, one thing I wanted to say, there are places you can have Bitcoin in self-custody, like multi-sig solutions. Unchained Capital has those. Mm-hmm. I think Swan offers those. I think there are multiple institutions where you can hold real Bitcoin in a multi-sig solution in an IRA. So I just wanted to say that. Sorry, and I interrupted you. I just wanted to give that example.
No. It's fascinating. And who sets these laws? I'm so confused. Like, it's like up to 1 million. Like, why? I don't understand. Is it like supposed to be, is it meant to like protect the investor? Is that the psychology behind it?
Yeah. I believe a prominent female senator from Massachusetts is behind almost all of this stuff, and I'm very bitter about it. And I've changed a lot of my own businesses, practices, and what I do because of these sorts of regulations that I've butted heads, clashed with for a couple of years. Very frustrating. So I think things will change with this next administration, and the laws will become much more amenable and much more easy to comply with.
Yeah, and not to get into any of the specifics or whatever, but it's almost as if like, you know, and I was talking about my show specifically, Dr. Ross, like we tried so hard to stay apolitical, and then it got to a point where, you know, me and Opti, of course, you know, Opti, and we were just like, and I told him, I was like, dude, are we gonna have to move to El Salvador? Like, this is insane. They forced our hand, and they created like a situation where the opposing political parties like, oh, this is votes. You know, I don't think they actually care. They're just like, this is a great political opportunity for us. You know, we'll say the things. And it's like they forced our industry to get active, where I think Bitcoiners inherently just don't care about politics. But it's like they poked our buttons to a point where we're just like, you know, like we just wanted to do something. But anyways, I wanted to pivot back to the MicroStrategy conversation, because that was so fascinating to me. There is some recent news that was dropping in regards to and I loved, and I'm sure you saw it, the Saylor poking the buttons at the Microsoft CEO. And then, you know, the shareholders like essentially, you know, put enough pressure on the board. And then Saylor was able to make a 3-minute video where he just essentially condensed all this information into a slideshow. But they had a vote, and it was like, by and large, they just shut it down. So, you know, we know all this is inevitable as Bitcoiners, but why can't everybody, like, why can't other people see it? You know, I know that Tesla has Bitcoin, but why can't a company like Microsoft, super successful, you know, makes a tremendous amount of money every year? They're holding, I think the last time I checked was $88 billion of cash or cash equivalents. So they're literally sitting on a melting ice cube. Why can't they see what Saylor sees?
Because they don't care. I mean, think about Saylor. He was desperate, right? In 2020, he even admits that. And I've even said that publicly when he's heard it, is that he had a crappy software business that was dying, and he needed to do something. And he even says, I was thinking about just shutting it all down, and then I discovered Bitcoin. I was looking at, like, I have these cash flows, which are great, but we haven't been able to grow or figure a solution out for years and years and years and years. And he has very frustrated shareholders. He's obviously a polymath, super intelligent guy. And I'm sure he was just kicking himself, like, day after day after day, like, what do I got to do to, you know, make this company grow again? And then and that led him to Bitcoin. When you look at the Mag 7, the Microsofts, the Amazon's going to be voting on this pretty soon as well. These other companies, they're so wildly successful in the fiat world that they don't need Bitcoin. They don't care. They're like, why would we disrupt the status quo? Why would we rock the boat? Because we're doing so great. And also, you got to understand, all of these businesses are run by committees. Everything is done by the board, right? And so even if you have 1 or 2 people who get Bitcoin, you have 8 to 20 people who don't get Bitcoin and think it's a hoax still, and they think it's a scam. It just takes time, right? So you got to get these younger people in who get it, or the few older people who get it, to affect change. Michael Saylor could do it because he was the founder and CEO. He's like, hey, I'm going to do this. I've decided, and here we go. And I have, a majority voting right, so nobody can stop me. If you don't like it, you can leave. He gave that offer to people way back in the day, and some people did take him up on that. So I just think that's what's going to happen. And it's sort of what we talked about earlier. it's not until these businesses get desperate that they realize they need Bitcoin and they need that annualized rate of return on their balance sheet till they realize like, hey, we're trying to do, build this product line, but it only has an IRR of like 20% or 15% or 10%. And like, should we really be doing this? What if we just put some Bitcoin on our balance sheet instead, or at least, maybe split it up half and half? So one of the things that I'm sort of proud of are, well, two things related to what you said. Before I left Twitter, I made a plea to my followers and said, if you own shares of these traditional stock market companies, these public companies, put shareholder proposals in there to get Bitcoin on the balance sheet. We got to start. We have all of this. We know the truth, right? So start spreading that and start forcing the issue, because as a shareholder, you still have that power to bring up these issues. So that made a lot of news with Microsoft, and ended up, so Saylor got to give his little 3-minute pitch. I'm proud to say I was one of the votes, or my fund actually owns Microsoft. We voted in favor of it. It lost. It only got 0.55% of the vote. So 99.45% said no. I was part of the 0.55% that said yes. And people are like, how can you own Microsoft? It's a fiat company. And I'm like, I know. But my fund was a total fiat fund from the beginning. It was a value fund that invested in technology and healthcare stocks. And we have come into Bitcoin. And now we're like a massively Bitcoin-centric fund, but we still have a lot of these older tech companies and things. And I still want to affect change from within, right? So I also own Amazon in our fund. I'm going to be voting in favor of that too. We're going to lose by a massive margin. But I guarantee that over the years, we'll start to win. And one by one, these companies, somebody is going to figure it out, right? Maybe it's Tim Cook at Apple. Who knows? It's somebody somewhere who will have a lot of power, who will say, you know what, we need to get on a Bitcoin standard, or at least put a little bit of Bitcoin on our balance sheet, or we're going to fall too far behind. So I know it's going to happen. I think by the end of the decade, a lot more companies are going to do it. We're all excited about the fact that it's not just Saylor anymore, right? Now it's Semler Scientific, Marathon, Riot are doing it, 2 Bitcoin miners. Dylan LeClaire over at Metaplan is doing that over in Japan. I love it. I love it all. It's just the beginning though, right? I mean, it's literally going from like 0 to 1. That's what's going to drive this next cycle though. So that's why I think that's how we get to say 475,000 or somewhere between 200,000 and a million. And then we fizzle again when the liquidity drains out of the system. But the next cycle, we went from 0 to 1 this cycle, we're going to go from 1 to 5 or 1 to 10% the next cycle. And that's what's really going to be driving the next wave in the next cycle. So I'm very excited about that as well.
I 100% agree with you. I think that, because I see it from like and not to mention Tesla, because a lot of people sleep, but Tesla actually owns it's like 10,000 Bitcoin. Like they're not doing the MicroStrategy strategy, but he has, and it's not only Tesla, it's SpaceX too, right?
Yep.
Which is really interesting. But the way that I would say it is, if you don't have Bitcoin on your balance sheet, you are at a competitive disadvantage to companies that do. And the reason I'm saying this is obviously Michael Saylor's proving it, but Dr. Ross, you've known me for a while now, and somehow I managed to make my hobby into a podcast, into a small media company. I have no idea how it would happen. But one of the things that we've applied at Simply is we have a Bitcoin, like our treasury at least I can't do full because I have to make payroll every month, but at least half or more than like 50-60% is in Bitcoin. And it's your runway just keeps getting longer. It's a literal cheat code. I can't emphasize that enough. Like if you're a business and you don't have a Bitcoin treasury, you have no idea what you're missing. And I think it applies to people on an individual level as well, right? If you're on a Bitcoin standard, but I think no one really saw it. It really became popular. Is your business? It's not only are you on a Bitcoin standard, is your business on a Bitcoin standard? That really started to become popular relatively recently, but it is such a cheat code. You don't even have to have a Bitcoin business. Right. It's just any business. If you are on a Bitcoin standard, you're at a competitive advantage compared to everyone else that's not on a Bitcoin standard. and also your runway, your treasury is just going to keep expanding, over time. So, and then I guess my question to you, Dr. Ross, is that just because of I don't, the correct word is not deflationary, but is that just because Bitcoin just increases in purchasing power over time? Is it as simple as that?
All right. It's a decentralized, secure, neutral energy money. That's how I describe it. I like those terms and I choose them carefully. Neutral, when I say that, basically it's a fixed supply, obviously, right? So and Jeff Booth talks about this all the time. So it captures the deflationary forces that technology. So human progress is deflationary. Deflationary gains are captured in Bitcoin. And so the two things that, and this is just like literally alien. We're speaking a different language to people in the fiat system. They can't even imagine this because we grew up in this inflationary world, right? This fiat world where everything gets more expensive. The packages get smaller. The amount of food gets smaller and quality decreases on the fiat system. And that's what we're all used to. You get less and less and less for more and more and more every year. It's crazy. It's criminal and it's theft by the government. So we all know that, right? We don't have to talk about that. What is Bitcoin? It's literally what does it do? It means that prices go down year after year on average. Yes, every third or every fourth year they go up, but then they go down again, and over time they go down. So over time prices go down. Over time quality improves. Every Bitcoiner I've ever known, and I've known a lot of Bitcoiners, including myself, we've all, as we've gotten more and more on a Bitcoin standard, we've experienced life getting cheaper, quality improving. And so when I tell people who are and so I'm a physician, right? You guys know that. I have doctors talk to me all the time, like, well, should we put it on our balance sheet? And I'm like, do you want your medical practice? Do you want the costs of your goods and services to get cheaper and the quality to improve? They're like, well, yeah. I'm like, so put Bitcoin on your balance sheet. They're like, well, you can't. I'm like, you can do that. I'm like you keep like Nico, you run a business, you have a payroll, but you usually have a little extra money. You don't ever go all the way down to zero in your bank account. Put 10% of it into Bitcoin and just start doing that. And then and that will grow. And then as your comfort level with Bitcoin increases, you can increase that to 20 and then to 30 and then to 50, and that's what it happens to every individual. And then it happens to every business, and every business that does that, life gets cheaper and quality improves. And so I'm so excited about this for healthcare, because healthcare in the US is super frustrating for doctors. We hate it. The system is broken. It's run by administrators and pharma companies and insurance agents, and they all get in our grill all the time and tell us what we can and can't do. And it's super frustrating, and patients hate it because they're like, the doctor said I needed this, but insurance just declined it, and it's all of this stuff. And it's not just healthcare that's broken, by the way. The education system is broken. The military is broken. All of these systems have been taken over by this crappy fiat system. And the government's got their fingers in everything, right? And you can look at charts like, so going back to healthcare, the administration staff of healthcare has gone like this, and the doctors has gone like this, right? And as the administration goes up here, people are more and more unhappy. The doctors and patients are unhappy. Same thing in finance. I shut down my RIA this year, which was very hard, and it was a hard decision, but I'm super happy I did it. Had like 120 clients that I had to let go of, because the regulators were just driving me nuts. I was butting heads all the time by people who literally sit in an office who don't know how to invest, forcing me to comply to their rules on how to invest safely for my clients. And it just drove me nuts. And I'm like, I'm out. I can't take this anymore. Okay. So I'm sorry, I'm going on a little tangent. All Bitcoin does is make life cheaper, and it makes quality improve for all of humanity. And so if you want that for your life, then you should own Bitcoin. If you want it for your family, you should own Bitcoin. I'm a Christian. If you want it for your church, you should own Bitcoin. If you want it for your pension or your endowment, if your university is struggling right now, you should own Bitcoin in your endowment or your pension or just in your savings account. If you're a business, and especially if you're a physician and you run a private physician practice, and there are a lot of people who follow me who do that, put Bitcoin on your balance sheet. You will soon, over 10, probably within 5 years, but over probably 10 years, you'll start to have better services. You'll all have more purchasing power, meaning you'll make more money. you will be able to provide cheaper and better equipment. Like, right, I'm a radiologist. You can get the best MRI scans, the best CT scans, the best equipment for your patients because you're making so much more on the Bitcoin standard, and you can actually charge less on a Bitcoin standard for your patients. So people will love you. You'll be super happy. Everyone will be happier. It literally is better money for a better world. And it's so simple, but nobody does it because everybody's too scared because they don't want to disrupt the status quo. So I'm like, be bold, take a chance, like trust yourself and your intuition, and start doing that with yourself and with your family and with your business. And then you can thank me 10 years from now, or thank Nico.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a cheat code. It's a cheat code.
Yeah.
You know, it's so, we're so, the world is so nihilistic because they've just been conditioned to live in the fiat system. And despite all of that, the free market still works, right? Despite all of that, you know, people are able to put businesses together despite, you know, all these disadvantages. And then Bitcoin comes in and it's like almost too good to be true, right? But all it is, it's just, you know, and I love the way that Jeff Booth puts it. He's like, look, this is the way that prices should be. This is the way that the market should function. You know,
Yes.
it is unreasonable to think that, you know, for whatever reason on Saturdays and Sundays, you can't buy whatever stock you want. Like the market just shuts down. If the volatility is too big, there's a circuit breaker. And then in regards to Bitcoin, it's like, you know, it's actually properly reflecting the improvements in innovation and the improvements in productivity. And he makes a case that it's like the world is naturally deflationary and Bitcoin is the only thing that is accurately portraying that, because everything else is so manipulated that it makes it seem like life is supposed to be getting more expensive, where why should it be getting more expensive? And, you know, the way that I'm seeing it, Dr. Ross, is like my generation. So I'm a millennial, and Gen Zers, like, we really got the short end of the stick with 2008, 2009. And somehow you're looking at it. If it wasn't for Bitcoin, you know, like I would have less opportunities than my parents. I wouldn't have the ability to purchase a house the way they did. I wouldn't have like the job opportunities, but the world on paper is richer. It's much richer. So what is going on there? If you're on a Bitcoin standard, I love this one the first time I heard it. It's like the American dream isn't dead. You're just using the wrong unit of account, you know? So, you know, it's definitely a cheat code. But anyways, we are getting to the top of the hour, and I do want to give you one last opportunity, Dr. Ross, you know, to the audience. We haven't talked in a while. What are some last words of wisdom that you have for everybody heading into what we anticipate is going to be the year of the parabola? Everyone's really excited. What would those words of wisdom be?
Oh man. Okay, I'll try to be concise, but let me think. So you talked about Bitcoin being a cheat code. I totally agree with that. One thing I want to say to that, or to qualify, is there's a certain personality that gets freaked out when they hear that term, because they're like, I don't want to cheat. That sounds bad. It sounds ominous, right? Okay, so just so people understand, you're not cheating if you use it. Bitcoin is totally permissionless. You don't have to ask permission to use it. It's an opt-in system. It's optional. Unlike government fiat, where you have to use it, right? You can decide to use it, and that's one of the things that makes Bitcoin beautiful. So but to Nico's point, it is a cheat code for a better life. If you want your life to get cheaper and you want quality to improve, then get yourself on a Bitcoin standard. Even if that means just getting off of zero and just owning a few Satoshis, like that's how it all starts. The second thing is, and I have to credit Jeff Booth for this, is I get asked all the time, and it's because I'm a fund manager too, to make price predictions in dollar terms. And we all get excited about the bull markets, and we all get excited about the exponential move higher that we're all expecting. Try not to focus on that though, right? Like, think about Bitcoin as prices go down technology. I show all the time, I still do this over on Nostr, where I show every month an updated page from the Fed, the St. Louis Federal Reserve. They have a page that says buying eggs with Bitcoin. Look, you can look it up yourself. Go Google it. And it shows the price of eggs in dollars. And then right below it, it shows the price of eggs in Bitcoin since January of 2015. It is fascinating to look at. And I love it that they have it on there because they originally put it on there to show that Bitcoin is too volatile and you shouldn't use it. Look how much better it is in dollar terms. But what that chart shows, and I've started showing it in 5-year increments, so rolling 5-year periods. Over the last 5 years, the price of eggs in dollar terms has gone up about 2.5 times. So about 150%. I think it's a little higher than that actually. And in Bitcoin terms, it's actually been cut in half. It's a little more than cut in half. So you're paying less than half for eggs than you were 5 years ago if you live on a Bitcoin standard, and you're paying 2.5 times more if you have dollars. So think about Bitcoin as prices go down and quality improves technology. Don't get too excited. You're going to see people making all this money and they're going to talk about trading Bitcoin. But I would just really encourage you to think of it as the world's greatest savings technology, right? The only reason we have these big, huge increases in price are because of these liquidity waves. When the waves come in, just like a wave comes, it's super powerful, but then it passes you and then it goes down again. And the price, we're going to have a bear market after that. So I don't like it when people get disenfranchised because they aped in, they FOMO'd in at 400K. And then now Bitcoin fell all the way back down to 100K again. So have a longer term perspective in mind. I can't make guarantees, but I'm very confident that 10 years from now, the price of Bitcoin will be at least $1 million and probably more, per Bitcoin. So think about pricing your life in Bitcoin. Think about having a better life. Think about how can I capture the gains that humanity is, all this human progress is making life better and making life cheaper and making quality improve. You can capture that by owning Bitcoin. So it's just so much bigger than a trade, and start thinking about that way and start trying to live on a Bitcoin standard. And you'll literally start noticing an improvement in your life, a minimum of 4 years, and probably sooner.
Love it. I completely agree. Dr. Ross, always a pleasure to have you on the show. Really appreciate it. Now, you have left at Twitter, which now is called X. So where can people find you and stay up to date with what you're doing and what you're thinking and what you're working on?
Yeah, so I'm intentionally being more reclusive now, so staying out of the spotlight a little bit. I'm on Nostr a little bit. I'm actually not on there that much, but I'm Dr. Jeff on Nostr. And that's really it. I run my hedge fund and I keep a low profile. And so you should follow, if you want to follow me, follow Nico instead and follow Simply Bitcoin, and you'll be much happier. You'll get a lot more content.
Really appreciate it, Dr. Ross. Very kind of you.
Thanks, Nico.
Awesome.